Who's ready for some possible hot takes and personal opinions on the top 10 cards from the upcoming Brothers War set? This is my personal list, not anybody else's, so it might not match. So if you have a better idea what you think should be in the top 10, please let us know in the comments below. But for now, let's get on to the list. First up is Cityscape Leveler in my number 10 slot. For 8 colorless mana, you get a construct 8/8 with trample that says when it is cast or when it attacks, destroy target non-land permanent. And then it also has Unearth 8. So Meteor Golem's big brother has now entered the chat. This card is kind of a good analog to that card, but it does have some differences. If you're wanting to deal with ETB triggers, you're going to want to stick with the Meteor Golem, especially in commanders such as Yarak the Desecrated. But if you're looking for a new way to get in attack triggers, Ishin will love this card because then he'll get to destroy 2 creatures when this thing attacks, and it's just a good upgrade there. I don't see it going everywhere, but it's going to replace a lot of Meteor Golems and other things that destroy creatures and permanents in the format. Next up is Lauren of the Third Path. For 2 and a white, you get a 2/1 human artificer with vigilance that says when it enters the battlefield, destroy target enchantment or artifact. It also has an activated ability of tap and target opponent and you draw a card. Well, this has some applications. The Reclamation Sage in green sees a lot of play in the commander format, and this is probably no exception. But here, it gets a color that actually can abuse that enters the battlefield trigger much better than green. Green usually relies on you to let it die and then bring it back to your hand and recast it. In this case, though, we're in the flickering color, so you can sit there and flicker this and just blow up as many artifacts and enchantments as you have flickering spells in the hand. So keep an eye out on this. I think this is going to see a lot of play, especially in white decks. Speaking of white decks, the next card is a white card. It's Calamities Wake. For 1 and a white, you get an instant that says exile all graveyards. It also says that players cannot play non-creature spells until the next turn, exile Calamities Wake. This thing is getting a lot of press online, and I can see why. In Commander, this is going to be actually a very good card for you. Say you need to keep your board alive for another turn and you don't want your opponent wiping you out and you know they have a wipe. Well, during their upkeep, cast this, locks them out of that board wipe. Say you want to resolve a spell that you know they have counter magic and you want to make sure it gets through, cast this. Then they either have to burn the counter on the Calamities Wake or they have to just concede that you're going to get that other spell through. So I do think this is going to see a lot of play. Keep an eye on this one. Next on my list at number 7 is Portal to Forexia for 9 colorless. It has an ETB that says when it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures, and it has a trigger upon upkeep to return target creature from a graveyard under your control, and it becomes a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. So let's get this out of the way. 9 mana is a lot, but in Commander, it don't really matter. You have all kinds of ways to cheat this thing onto the battlefield between all the mana wrap and all the kinds of stuff that doubles up your mana, ways that we can recur it from the graveyard. You know, there's a bunch of ways to get this thing out quick and easy. The best way that I can think to do it is in red discard. You discard this thing and then you use a Goblin Welder, bring it back to the yard, and you just smash your opponent's stuff and start stealing it. And then you can just keep doing this over and over again, because then you can weld the portal, throw it back in the graveyard, weld something else, bring it back, and you just keep recycling it over and over again. This card's going to probably see a lot of play, and I think it's very powerful. Alternatively, you could combine it with the next card on my list. At number 6, it's Arms Race. For 3 and a red, you get an enchantment that says pay 3 and a red, put an artifact from your hand onto the battlefield. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the end of turn. Last I checked, Sneak Attack is pretty good, and this is kind of a variation on that, but it also is not a mythic, unlike or a rare in the case of the original printing. But in this instance, you can bring down artifact creatures and give them haste. You're going to slam something like the Portal Phyrexia that we just talked about. You can do all kinds of stuff like that, and then you can just start recurring them back out of the graveyard as you go along. This is going to get interesting, especially if you do something big like a Cityscape Leveler or anything like that. You just slam them, swing, let it die, bring it back. Next up, we have a black card. It's Gixian Puppeteer. For 3 and a black, you get a 4/3 Phyrexian Warlock that says whenever you draw your second card each turn, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. It also has a trigger on it that when it dies, you can return a creature from your graveyard, mana cost 3 or less, to the battlefield. Now, black is the expert at paying life to draw cards. So in this case, we can actually bend that rule a little bit. Instead of getting them, pay life to get cards a little bit cheaper, we can get free cards or even come out ahead on our life totals with this thing. So let's say we play Phyrexian Arena. You have this out, you're actually coming up a life and getting that extra card. Or if you have Black Market Connections, you pay the 2 life, it's free. You just draw the card. It's just like it's a blue card. What's not to love here? And this combines very well with Shieldred, of course. So this is one I think is going to see play in a lot of black decks. Next up in my number 4 slot, it's Fauna Shaman. For 1 and a green, you get a 2/2 Elf Shaman that says pay a green and discard a creature card and tap it. Go and search your library for a creature card, put it into your hand, or reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. This is a really important reprint. This card has not been printed that often. It was originally printed in M11 and has only seen one other printing in Ultimate Masters since then. So if you were waiting to get your hands on one, right now this printing is actually halving the cost of the print, because right now they're going for about $13 to $14, and the new printing is going for about $6 to $7 at the time of recording. This is a really good card, and this is also in the tradition of Wizards printing cards that are functional reprints of reserve list cards. This is actually Survival of the Fittest, but it's actually done up on a new card, and I love this, and I wish they would do this more often with the old reserve list cards. At number 3, we're staying in green with Awaken the Woods. For X green, you get a sorcery that says create X Forest Dryad land creature tokens. That's a little bit of a mouthful. And that's it. It's simple, but very devastatingly huge for the game. Landfall is a thing. These things that you create count as lands, even though they have summoning sickness when you create them. If you have ways of giving them haste, it's basically free mana. If you have a landfall trigger, let's say Lotus Cobra, you do this, you get all the mana back on the X part of the spell. There's just a litany of things that you can do with this card. If you have token doublers, you're basically doubling your land count for whatever you dump into the X. There is just a lot of applications, and this card is going to be quite expensive, so I'd recommend, if you want this, I wouldn't hold back on it, and I would get it now. In my number 2 slot, we have Transmogrance Crown. For 2 colorless, you get an artifact equipment that says +2/+0 to the equipped creature, and when it dies, draw a card, and it equips for 2 colorless or a black. Now, this is their attempt at quote-unquote fixing Skull Clamp, which, when they printed that card back in Darksteel, they screwed up. They thought that giving it a -1 on the back end was going to be a drawback, and it actually turned into a huge benefit. And it just made it so you could feed whatever X1 creatures you wanted to into the meat grinder and just fill your hand back up. So this one does not do that. However, in Commander, we don't really care about the -1 part of the card. We just care about attaching it to something and feeding it into a sacrifice outlet and then keep on trucking through. For a full flavor win here, though, let's use Ashnod's Altar. You equip something, you sack it for the 2 colorless, and then you can use that 2 colorless to equip it to something else, and you just keep doing that over and over again until you've either completely filled your hand back up or you have sacrificed everything you can sacrifice. I love this card. It's just going to be a second copy of Skull Clamp for the decks that want it. And coming in my number 1 slot, Morel Shield of Argive. For 3 and a white, you get a human soldier, 3/4, that says during your turn, your opponents cannot cast spells and cannot activate abilities of creatures, artifacts, or enchantments. It also has a attack trigger of when it attacks, create X soldier tokens where X is equal to the number of soldiers you control. So at worst, she's going to create a 1/1 on her own because she is a soldier herself. But the big draw here is actually that static ability where they lock your opponents out of being able to do anything to you while you're trying to do things on your turn. Grand Abolisher is a very expensive card. It's only been printed 2 or 3 times now, one of which was actually in a supplemental, actually, 2 of which were in supplemental products, now that I think about it. And it does the exact same thing as the top half of this card, and it's about a $30 card right now as of the time of this recording. Morel is pre-selling for about $20, and she's a mythic versus the rare that the Grand Abolisher is. If you have been looking for a Grand Abolisher and didn't want to spend $30 on it, And if you have interest in Morel, I would suggest getting this card. I think for Commander, this is probably one of the most looked for cards that's going to be coming out of this set. It's easier to cast than the Abolisher. Right now, it's a little bit cheaper than the Abolisher, and it has some functionality with Soldier Tribal. So don't sleep on this card. I think it's probably going to be the most effective thing coming out of the set for Commander. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with my top 10 list here? Please let me know in the comments below. As I said earlier, this is my list. Somebody else's list is going to be different, but I would love to know your opinions. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.